Next on the PowerPLAY Show, he's a criminal defense attorney prevailing against the oppression of our penal system, and he won't back down.
Kenneth Edelin Jr. learned early on to stand for the underserved, underprivileged, and underrepresented. It's a conversation on race, justice, and what this all means. Next on the PowerPLAY Show.
From the studios at Hull Bay Productions, this is Season 4 of the PowerPLAY Show.
Welcome to the PowerPLAY. I'm your co-host, Kimberly Perez.
And I'm your co-host, Tonya McGrath. From civil rights to social justice, for the last several years, attacks on our judicial system have permeated our news stories, from the White House to the Black Lives Matter movement. We've paid particular attention to who is prosecuted and why, and asked ourselves if our scales of balance need to be recalibrated. Among those working to fight against this imbalance is Kenneth Edelin Jr., an unrelenting advocate for the underserved, underprivileged, and underrepresented. It is a fight we see too few and far between, with criminal defense attorneys prevailing against the oppression of our penal system. But a fight, nevertheless, Kenneth will see to the very last round. Kenneth's criminal experience ranges from inception to trial and includes charges from DUIs to murder in both state and federal courts. He began his career at the Defender Association of Philadelphia as a trial attorney, with the latter half at the federal office of the Defender Association of Philadelphia. After over 25 years of serving the indigent and working on behalf of the most neglected, mistreated, and undervalued citizens in our society, Kenneth joined Vander Veen, Harshorn, and Levin in 2022. Those law firms, there was always like 6 names to that. Anyways, his passion remains client-centered advocacy for those most challenged by historic injustice, discrimination, and powerlessness. It is my pleasure to introduce our guest today, Kenneth Edelin. Kenneth, welcome to the PowerPLAY.
Thank you. Good morning, all, and thank you for having me.
I can't believe it's taken me this long to have you on, but I'm so excited to talk to you today. But first, tell us a little bit about yourself. Kenneth and I go back to 1980, when we were in high school. So
I'll say I graduated in 85. We'll say you were several years behind me. How about that?
Just one. Just one. So yeah, tell us a little bit more about yourself, your family, what's going on with your wonderful granddaughter, your brand new granddaughter.
Right. So I always start off, and not that I do this often, but I always start off acknowledging how blessed and lucky and fortunate I am. And I fully understand that and fully recognize and appreciate that. I am the father of 4 amazing children, affectionately known as 4Ks Inc. So shout out to Kendall, Kenny III, Kimberly with an EY, and Kayla. They are amazing. They are doing wonderful things, and they are absolutely the best thing I have ever been a part of. Graduated from Brookline High School in 1985, went to Morehouse College, graduated in 1990, and then went to Howard University School of Law, graduating in 1996. In between Morehouse and Howard, I worked in the DC area for 3 or 4 years. One of my main jobs was that I was a manager at a home for juveniles, pre-adjudicated juveniles. So they were caught up in the criminal justice system. And one of my responsibilities was to go back and forth to court with them. And it was there I saw firsthand how we were treated. This is DC. So obviously they looked like us. How they were and were not treated. And that's why I went to law school. I went to law school specifically to be a public defender because we needed help. And that was the way I saw and thought I could help. At the time I was coming out of Howard, the 2 best public defender offices in the country, in my opinion, were either in DC or Philly. And the best decision I ever made was coming to the Philly Public Defender's Office. I was fortunate again and blessed to be nurtured and nourished and mentored by some of the best attorneys I would suggest in the country. They were folks who were impassioned. They were folks who were dedicated to us and our community. They were folks who were entrusted and took the responsibility seriously of training up young lawyers. And that is where I learned how to be a trial attorney in general and a Philadelphia lawyer in particular. And so I don't take this responsibility lightly. And I also understand how fortunate I am to have been put in a position to be able to accept that.
So Kenneth, when you were originally going to school, when you were originally going to college, I know you decided you wanted to work in law when you worked in the juvenile system. But what did you want to do before that? Was it the same, or was that the turning point?
So, first of all, I have to preface all that by saying I'm a terrible student, have always been a terrible student. I was terrible in high school. I was terrible at Morehouse. I got a little better in law school. So when I started at Morehouse, I was pre-med. Obviously, my dad was a doctor, and so I thought I was going to follow in those footsteps. Got through my first year pre-med. I was making my schedule for the second year. And one of the mandatory classes I had to take was a 5-hour chemistry lab. And so I figured out very quickly that was not for me. I was self-aware enough to know that was just a recipe for disaster, that I would never be successful in that. So ultimately I switched to psychology, graduated with a BA in psychology. And I was still trying to find myself, which is why I was back in DC working. My mom lived in DC at the time. Dad was still in Boston. Took the GRE, took the LSAT. Again, I'm fortunate and blessed enough that despite being terrible in school, I typically do pretty well on standardized tests. So those gave me some options. Was fortunate enough to end up at Howard University School of Law. And it took off from there.
So what did you see maybe in your community or in the country that infuriated you about, our justice system, and why did you decide, why did you decide to do this, especially for marginalized people?
And I would suggest that it's not just the justice system. I cannot take any credit for who and how I was raised. That was totally fortunate, a total blessing, that I had a mother and father who were and are immersed in our culture, immersed in civil rights, immersed in being culturally responsive and proactive and aggressive, speaking out for the downtrodden, fighting for those who are less fortunate. My dad passed away in 2013, and I know we'll talk about him in a little while because of his impact in Boston. But it's also important that I make sure you all know that my mother, who is still with us, and quite frankly, who you should be interviewing, I'm an appetizer. I'm like mozzarella sticks. She is a 10-course cuisine meal. So I got to make sure I connect you all. She has stories about Boston for days. Number one, she's brilliant. She is easily one of the smartest, if not the smartest person I know. She is also gorgeous, so your viewers wouldn't have to be bothered with looking at my ugly face for an extended period of time. And she's amazing, and she can tell you stories about Boston, and I think your viewers would appreciate it. Just a quick story, for example, she was a professor at Northeastern University, and she is a founder or co-founder of the Afro-American Institute at Northeastern. So her roots run that deep. She was a student coordinator for SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, student coordinator for the SCLC, Southern Christian Leadership Conference. I used to say that she was also a student coordinator for the Black Panthers, but she gently reminded me that now she was doing this long before the Panthers even came into existence. So
nice.
I definitely need to make sure I connect her with you all. So my outrage, my concern, my awareness of the disparities and the disenfranchisement of us and the unfair treatment of us extends far beyond just the judicial system. That is just where I found my niche and my avenue to try to make a contribution.
So, as Tonya said, your cases range from DWI to criminal cases. How do you decide which cases to take on?
By who needs help. I mean, and for me, that's the easiest formula. If somebody comes to me, and more often than not, it's somebody's loved one who comes to me, and they say, Ken, we need help. My family needs help. Again, I was raised and trained and taught how to be an attorney in the Philadelphia Public Defender's Office. So we are used to trying to protect those who have been historically disenfranchised, historically subjugated, who have historically borne the brunt of all of the socioeconomic ills that we know exist, whether we choose to speak about them or not. And they need a voice. They need somebody who they can be comfortable with fighting for them. More often than not, this is the worst point in their life. And because of their financial situation, they don't have the opportunity to choose who will be their attorney. And so now they're facing the hardest choices of their lives. They're facing the most dangerous and the most difficult circumstances, and they're having to do it with somebody that they don't know and didn't choose. And so I recognize that and I understand that, and I try to be cognizant of that as I am speaking with and representing them, communicating with their families, and going forward. And when I was in some of my training and managerial capacities, that was the main message I would try to impart on the younger attorneys. You have to understand and be cognizant, be empathetic to who we are representing and why we are representing them, and the level of depravity that they've had to endure and, quite frankly, overcome, which is more impressive in most cases, overcome those hurdles to be where they are today. And so that's how I started my career. That's how I choose my cases. I'm fortunate now to have joined a firm who is also full of fighters and full of people who are trying to protect the rights of those who need protecting. And they allow me to do my thing. They allow me to represent those who I need to represent, align myself with who I need to align myself with. But the overwhelming and overriding ethos is that we protect those, we represent those who need help. And we don't always have to agree with people's political stances or political outlooks. And I'm sure if you go on the website, everybody will figure out what I'm talking about. But I have the freedom and the autonomy to represent and to who I need to represent, and the respect from the leadership of the firm to not represent who I don't need to represent.
I'm really proud that you're in a position, in a space where you feel as supported as you do. I think that makes all the difference in terms of being able to know and understand and fight for those who can't fight for themselves. But now I'm going to kind of switch gears a little bit, because I want to jump into the legal system as a whole and kind of get your response to some of the stats that I found doing the research for this. And I'm going to begin right now with a report, 2018 report from the Sentencing Project. African Americans are more likely than white Americans to be arrested. And once arrested, they are more likely to be convicted. And once convicted, and they are more likely to experience lengthy prison sentences. Is that your experience? And do you feel as though, 2018 wasn't that long ago, it was only 5 years ago. Are things getting better, worse, or about the same?
So when I have these discussions, I need to start from a place to make sure everybody, obviously all of this is my opinion and folks are free to agree or disagree as they choose, but let's make no mistake that the system is working exactly as it was designed to work. We are intentionally underserved. We are intentionally marginalized. So whether we're talking about pretrial incarceration, whether we're talking about higher bails, whether we are talking about overwhelming numbers of arrests, certainly in relation to our percentage of the population, whether we are talking about overwhelming numbers of those incarcerated, certainly in respect to the percentage of us in the population, whether we're talking about longer sentences, none of this is by accident, even if the argument could be made that it is not consciously done. This is a system that has been in place since the founding of this country. And this is a system that is served to ensure and protect the notion that there must be an underclass. And I'm not a big conspiracy theorist. I don't go into all of that, but I do understand history. I am able to read and comprehend fairly well. So I understand the nature and the history and the construct of this country and what it is built on. I think what is different now is that we have some people and some organizations and some avenues where we are able to muster the courage, muster the wherewithal to expose these things, to highlight these things, to bring these things to mass attention. And that is difficult. That's by no means easy because you put yourself and your family at personal risk. But we are getting to a place, certainly social media, certainly everyone having a video camera in their pocket nowadays allows for a platform that makes this a lot more easier to do. But so I can't say that it's getting worse. I can say it is being publicized more. It is being made public more. We are now able to be more aware of what was going on. But if we take a moment to go through the history books and look back at what has happened, it's terrible. It's just as bad, if not worse. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
it does. It does. And, I'm going to talk to any freshman or sophomore college students out there. If you take a sociology course, you're going to learn all about what Kenneth is saying relative to how this system was created for this. It essentially, as you just said, we had to have the haves and the have-nots. That's the only way that how this country was going to work. And guess who the have-nots were? When it comes to who is incarcerated during pretrial motions, and this I'm not surprised about. According to the U.S. Bureau of Justice statistics, African Americans are incarcerated in local jails at a rate 3.5 times of white people. And I assume a lot of this is a financial reason, but is there something else in here that's going on?
Well, it is certainly financial. It is certainly socioeconomics. But it is also I don't know if ingrained, I don't know if implicit bias, I don't know if those terms are the best terms. But the reality is, if you look at somebody as a lesser person, as a lesser human, if you look at somebody as not having the same familial connections, not having the same level of people who love them, then it's easy to discard them and throw them away. It's easy to put them in a cage, right? If you're not taking into account the historical, social, and economic hurdles that they have faced, then you don't have a problem setting a bail that is unreasonable to think they could make. And so I think that's a big part of it. Yes, financial is the surface, But we wouldn't even get to that point if I was viewing you as a person, if I was viewing you as a human, if I was taking into account the impact not only it will have on you, but your family of removing you from the community. And, sadly, there are probably any number of instances where that was taken into account and the conscious decision was made to do that.
Right.
But even for those that are not doing that explicitly, without taking that into account, it makes it easy.
Last thing I wanted to touch upon in this section is the 3 strikes law. Now, my stepfather is a retired district court judge and absolutely hates this law more than anything else I think that he experienced in his career. Pennsylvania is not one of the 28 states who have this law in their books, but it is here in Massachusetts. And just for folks who aren't really sure what the 3 strikes law is, if you are convicted of 2 felonies. I was trying to say felonies and penalties in the same word. So if you're convicted of 2 previous felonies, and then you are arrested and convicted on the 3rd, you automatically get life without parole. What is fundamentally wrong, or is there something wrong with this law?
Obviously and absolutely it's wrong. And it does not view people as individuals. Mm-hmm. It is a broad stroke that is unilaterally applied, that has no regard for the individual person's circumstance who is standing before you. It is an overreaction an overreaction and an outshoot to the whole get tough on crime mindset and movement. I would suggest it is akin to how the crack and cocaine sentencing disparity laws came into play and how they were viewed, and ultimately, fortunately, how they were seen to be wrong and unjust and overturned. But it is a way to remove large swaths of populations and communities out of households, out of being productive, out of raising children, out of any chance of reform and reformation. And, I'm sure it's no surprise that most of those, at least percentage-wise, in terms of population, because, the numbers, the raw numbers may be different just because of the percentage of people in the population. Right. But percentage-wise, I'm sure it's no surprise that most of those people affected by it are Black and brown people, mm-hmm. And Black and brown males. And we can go into how that destabilizes community, destabilizes homes, and all of that. But again, it's not by accident.
Because it's not just, you don't have to be convicted of a violent crime. I mean, these felonies could be, shoplifting over a certain amount of money, having, dealing drugs over. So, then you have to ask, okay, so is putting somebody away for life, or the option that might happen to someone, is that a deterrent? And I say no. I always say no when it comes to stuff like that. But I think when people start to think about, well, it's not a violent crime. If it's a violent crime, I think that, again, you can look at the individual circumstances to the person. But if it's a nonviolent crime, you're still taking this person's life away. And all that they've done really is just kind of hurt themselves.
The part of the issue is that you're not just taking their life away, but you're affecting everybody, and I would suggest negatively, around them. And you are not taking into account any possibility for redemption. And certainly all of us need that. All of us need the opportunity for that. It's absolutely tragic. There's no question about it. It's absolutely tragic.
So I'm going to shift now to the Black Lives Matter movement. and its impact on changes in the judicial system, especially when it comes, you know, to how officers are racial profiling, or if they are. What has been the biggest impact BLM has had on our system?
First of all, I think it's a shame. It's tragic, but it speaks to the larger issue that we even have to say Black Lives Matter.
Yeah.
Right? Well, I mean, why is it that? Of course.
Right.
Right? I mean, that's not saying nobody else's life matters, but the fact that we have to say and remind and protest and chant and march and disrupt to get even partial or tacit acknowledgement that our lives matter is ridiculous, right? I mean, how did we get here is the first question. Mm-hmm. And I understand that the organization may or may not have had some controversies and all of that, but the importance of the movement, I think, is unquestioned and should be unquestioned. And the importance of seeing and recognizing and taking note of those who vehemently opposed it, the movement, the acknowledgement that our lives matter, I think is equally as important.
Yes.
Because I think it forced people to come out of hiding. It forced people to be exposed. It forced them to reveal their true feelings about us and our citizenship, our station, our ability to function in this society. So that I would suggest that is the greatest impact that they've had. Yes, they've shown light on police brutality and the disparities in how we get treatment, and they have allowed and or forced some who were naively ignorant to that to have to see it. And those of good conscience will be confronted by it and be offended by it, and hopefully voice and or act in opposition to it. But it also revealed to everybody and confirmed to those of us who already knew that there's a serious opposition. There's a serious undercurrent. I don't know how to say it anything other than hate and disrespect and disregard for us, for merely existing. If you are offended by us saying Black Lives Matter, and you are offended by our very existence. And because if you are more upset about us saying that than the conditions that exist that require us to say that and remind you, then you are offended by our very existence.
I'm
sorry. No, you go ahead.
Do you think some of it is fear as well as being offended?
Yes, I'm sure it's fear. Or at least, yes, I'm sure some would couch it as fear. But it's an unreasonable and unjust fear. Fear of what? Fear that we will treat you as you have treated us? I mean, that could be the only rational fear. Unless you are concerned that we will turn around and treat you the same way we have historically been treated, what are you fearful of? Because other than that, your fear is that we'll be treated equally, which means you're afraid that you can't measure up, right? Your fear is that we will be given the same opportunities, the same avenues, the same recourse when treated unjustly, which means your fear is that you can't measure up. So I would suggest if those who are arguing part of it is fear, I would suggest that is an irrational fear, and it's a fear based on personal baggage, not anything grounded or rooted in reality.
But losing their status. losing their status, fear of losing their status.
Well, and again, I suggest that that's an irrational fear, because really what you're saying is, I fear that you will be treated equally, you will be given the same opportunities, you will be given the same love and respect that I demand for myself. And so my fear is I can't measure up if that happens.
Interesting. Attorney Benjamin Crum, he is kind of famous now. He was a trial lawyer for the George Floyd case, and he also represented families in the Trayvon Martin and Michael Brown cases and many others.
Yes, ma'am.
And how is he helping families and victims receive the justice they seek?
So, number one, we have to start by saying that he's an icon, that he is a champion. He is our champion. He is a fearless advocate, and I don't know the brother. I've never met him. Would certainly love to meet him. Would certainly love to work with him. So I am watching and seeing and evaluating from afar. But everything I see is that he is using his platform and his voice courageously to make sure that these atrocities that are happening, these injustices that are happening, are getting the public and national attention that they deserve, that these families deserve, that these victims deserve. It's important to know, and because I've had this discussion with others, it's important to know he is not law enforcement. He does not have the power to arrest anybody. He does not have the power to take anybody to trial. He does not have the power to make sure anybody gets convicted. That is not his role. That is not within his ability to do. What he is doing is protecting the dignity, the integrity of the families of victims. And that is crucially important. That is work that must be done. And certainly he is the most prominent. Some would argue that he is the best at doing it, but the folks are doing that all over the country, and it's work that must be done. So I start with icon, I start with our champion, and I commend, respect, and certainly hope that I would be able to emulate the level of courage and determination and competence that he has displayed.
Speaking of emulating, your father, Dr. Kenneth Edelin, must have instilled in you the passion for helping others, particularly those underserved. Talk about your dad a bit, and how much did his work impact you growing up?
He, again, this was nothing that I had anything to do with. I certainly am spiritual and believe in some metaphysical stuff, but even I don't go as far enough to say we choose who our parents will be, right? I don't. If I did, I certainly don't remember. So I am fortunate and blessed to have been raised by he and my mom, who were culturally aware, culturally responsible, and instilled in us, and I'm the oldest of 5, instilled in us a cultural responsibility that we have because we are fortunate, right? Because we were born into a circumstance where we were loved, where we were nurtured, where we were exposed to opportunities, whether we chose to take advantage of them or not. But then we have now a responsibility to reach back and pull up, to help those who weren't as fortunate, who aren't as fortunate, just due to circumstances. And so that I saw in both of them, certainly with Dad, the frontline fight that entails, to the being on the front line, to standing in the gap, to speaking truth to power, to protecting to the best of your abilities, often at great personal risk and consequence, but doing it because it's the right thing to do. And you do the right thing, and you speak in truth, and you live in love in spite of or despite the personal consequence, because you were fortunate enough to be able, and therefore you have that responsibility.
You know, I want to encourage our audience to read the book Broken Justice, which is the memoir of Dr. Edelin. Your dad was convicted of manslaughter by an all-white jury in a landmark abortion case, which was later overturned. And now I think about how we all witnessed the Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade last year. If your father were alive today, how do you think he would respond to this after everything that he did to help women and families, and even putting his own life on the line for the right of women to be able to make choices of their own?
He'd be in jail. He'd be locked up somewhere. I mean, and that's the reality of it. He would be,
and you would defend him.
He would be on the front line. He would be protesting. He would be speaking out. He would refuse to move. He would refuse to be quiet. He would refuse to stop, and they would lock him up. They would have to, because nothing short of that would stop him. He spent his whole life protecting a woman's right to choose what to do with her body. And it is a simple concept as that. He's not, and I don't know that anybody is necessarily pro-abortion, but he is absolutely steadfast. He was absolutely, and we are, because of his teaching and love and his training, absolutely steadfast in the unquestioned belief and principle that women have the right to choose what to do with their own bodies. And perhaps it's, because I spent my whole life with that concept. I am unable to comprehend how the opposite could be true. That is beyond me. It is beyond my ability to understand how you could say a woman does not have the right to choose to do what she feels she needs to do with her body. So he'd be locked up. He'd be in jail somewhere.
So, Kenneth.
Yes, ma'am.
Your 4 children. How you made some beautiful comments about how your parents raised you and your siblings. How are you raising your children? Are you doing it similarly? And that said, do any of your children want to follow in your footsteps?
None of them are going to follow in my footsteps, and that's probably a good thing. And so, first of all, I have to say this. I met their mother in law school. She and I actually went to law school together, ultimately got married. We have been separated and divorced for any number of years now. But I never missed the opportunity to say that she is overwhelmingly responsible for how amazing they are. And I owe it to them, and I owe it to her, and I owe it to how I was raised to publicly acknowledge that. And so I certainly do that. We raised them, I like to think, in a nurturing, a nourishing, a loving environment where they were exposed to opportunities, where they were instilled with the fact that they are fortunate to have these type of opportunities, to have the access to the resources that we were able to provide, to have the extent of exposure to more than just your block that we were able to provide. And so to answer your question directly, that is an absolute connection with how I was raised, because that's what my folks instilled in me. Charlize is their mother's name. That's what her folks instilled in her. And so we absolutely passed that down and tried to emulate that. As I'm sure my parents were banging their head against the wall dealing with me, your kids will find their path in their own time. And it may not be on your schedule. I certainly was not on my folks' schedule, I'm sure. But they find it. When they're out, when you're not there, they've told me, I've heard your voice. They've told me, I've heard mom's voice. I'm deciding between A and B. I hear the whispers. I may not have, you didn't know I was listening. I didn't know I was listening, but I heard the whispers. So they are absolutely amazing. They are doing wonderful things. My oldest just gave me my first grandchild, Miss Nyla Marie, who I call Scrunch. Nobody else will call her Scrunch. And so I am blessed. My children are healthy. They're doing wonderfully. Everything else for me is gravy. I can't ask for anything else.
You said earlier in the interview that you weren't a great student, but I want the world to know you were a hell of a ball player in high school. I'm just going to throw that out there. Last question for you.
And I have to say that was many pounds ago.
we were all many pounds ago. Last question for you. In a perfect world, what does justice mean to you?
Justice means truth. It means equality. It means equal access to opportunities. It means love. It means love. As I said, I'm sure my parents were banging their head, waiting for me to find my path. But what I remember from day one is to do unto others as you would have them do unto you. I mean, and that's love, right? Just treat me as you want to be treated. Just allow me to have the same opportunities that you are afforded. Treat me as a human being. Treat me as an equal. Treat me as someone you love. And let the chips fall where they may after that.
Well, I have to say an amen to that. Kenneth Edelin, thank you so much for this discussion today. You have an open invitation if you ever want to come on and discuss anything relative to any of your cases or the law, and we will definitely reach out to your mother. I have a feeling that she's going to be a great addition to this show.
Absolutely would be.
Okay, awesome. Remember, you can tune in each month for a new episode of the PowerPLAY Show. Until then, I'm Tonya McGrath.
And I'm Kimberly Perez. Until then.
You can listen to past episodes of the PowerPLAY Show wherever you subscribe to podcasts, including iHeartRadio, iTunes, and Pandora Podcasts. You can also watch the PowerPLAY Show on our YouTube channel. Simply search the Hull Bay Productions media channel and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Also tune in Saturdays at 5 p.m. on BroncoIRadio.com. Want more of the PowerPLAY Show? Visit thepowerplayshow.com.